We good on sound?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Jeff Anderson. I'm one of the lawyers working with survivors across the country. And I'm also here with our colleague who has been working here in New Jersey for some time with survivors. Greg, introduce yourself here.
Sure. Good afternoon. I'm Greg Gianfrancaro, and I'm working with Jeff and the other survivors in the state of New Jersey on the Boy Scout matters.
And we're also here with Bridie Farrell, and we're here with Marc Crawford, both survivor advocates who are going to also react to this information that's been recently revealed to us. When it comes to the Boy Scouts of America, it is no secret and known to most folks that they have had a long-standing practice of preservation of these perversion files. Their word, perversion files. That is scout leaders and masters across the country who they know raped and violated and molested children under their charge. And they kept those files secret and in their headquarters for many years, since the 1940s. It's also no secret that through litigation, courageous survivors coming forward across the country that a disclosure of those files has been forced and publicly available now. And 5,000 were posted on the Los Angeles Times website alone. And we have been posting files and disgorging these files for years as well. That's fairly known. 5,000 perversion files, Boy Scouts of America. What hadn't been known to us is the real scope of this until we were in a trial involving child sexual rape, involving an organization called the Children's Theater Company in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And an expert by the name of Dr. Janet Warren testified on the stand. And she testified that she, as an expert, had been working for the Boy Scouts of America for 5 years, auditing the perversion files and going through all of these Boy Scout perversion files. And she testified on the witness stand, and you have a transcript of her testimony. Excuse me, Marge. You over there. She testified, and this is her testimony under oath, that in her audit, there are 7,819 perpetrators who they believe were involved in sexually abusing a child. The they is the Boy Scouts of America. 7,819. She also testified that from reviewing all these files, we identified 12,254 victims. Once we heard this testimony, and working with Greg and other folks, we started to discern, well, how many are there in New York? How many are there in New Jersey that we can discern among these numbers, which frankly are quite shocking. Come back up here, Mark. And quite alarming. And what we've been able to discern and what we published in the pamphlets that we released today is that in New York alone, in these files, there are 130 of these perpetrators we are identifying in these in this information today from those files. And in New Jersey, how many, Greg? 50. 50. And so tell us about what you think the significance of this is and what we need to know about what's been happening here.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Like I said, my name is Greg Gianfrancaro. I'm an attorney in New Jersey, and I've been fighting sex abuse cases for over 20 years within this state. This today is trying to give, it's the first part of the process, Jeff, I think you'll agree with me, that we are trying to give victims in the Boy Scout, or among the Boy Scouts, former Boy Scouts, their voice back. I mean, what happens when you're sexually abused as a child is horrific, but what you lose as a victim, and certainly these two fine people to my left and to my right will better testify to this than I can, but you lose your voice, you lose power and control. And this is about the institution failing to do the right thing, failing to disclose the names. It shouldn't be us disclosing these names. It should be the institutions. It should be the Boy Scouts. They should be up here issuing the names of their leaders. And that's what today's all about. Thank you.
And Brady Farrell, you've been a survivor and advocate. Step up here, please. A co-founder of New York Loves Kids. And when this information was shared with you, first tell us a little bit about what brings you here and then how you reacted to this revelation.
Right. Again, my name is Bridie Farrell. I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. A brief bit about my story is that at 15 years, when I was 15 years old, I was training for the 1998 Olympic trials for short track speed skating, and I was molested by my then teammate, 33-year-old Andy Gable, who's a 4-time Olympian and Olympic silver medalist. Like so many survivors, I didn't speak for a long time. When I finally did speak, I told my story on National Public Radio. The following day, my abuser admitted it in the Chicago Tribune. However, I was barred from any sort of legal remedy because of the statute of limitations. And as a survivor, that's something I had to deal with. But what was harder for me is that any other speed skater coming through the ranks was no safer than I had been. And that is the same situation we're seeing in institutions across the board. We heard about it with Larry Nassar and USA Gymnastics. Of course, we're aware of it in the Roman Catholic Church. And today we're talking about it in the Boy Scouts of America. And it's not that we expect an institution or organization like the Boy Scouts to come forward and say these things today. They've had this information for years. The data starts in 1944. And they've had this information and have not protected the children which they are to serve. They have protected the pedophiles among their ranks. So on a daily basis, I'm talking about child sexual abuse. When I spoke to Jeff and heard these numbers of 7,800 known abusers to over 12,000 victims, it is appalling. It is shocking. It stops every one of us in our tracks. And I think it's important for everyone listening or watching just to think about, when I say briefly my story, it kind of it draws attention. You think, my God, that's awful. Well, think if there were 12,000 of us up here, right? And that's what is known. And so releasing these names and releasing these names of the perpetrators will help to seek recourse for any of the survivors and also change the institution to better protect the children.
And thank you, Brady. And Greg says that, we shouldn't be doing this. They should have, but they didn't. And the reason those names are in the pamphlet that was released today here, and 50 in number, right, Greg?
Yes, yeah.
Is that the Boy Scouts had reason to put them in their perversion files. And the Boy Scouts chose to keep those perversion files secret until ordered by courts to reveal them. But they may have taken them out of a leadership position, or they may not have. But they never alerted the community that your neighbor, your teacher, your electrician, your priest, and there's a lot of priests in there, aren't there? Who are Boy Scout leaders also. Our perversion file are in the perversion files, and the Boy Scouts of America had a reason to remove them from a leadership role, and they also chose to keep that secret. So, Marc Crawford, step up here. And you're a survivor, and you have been advocating for a long time in the New Jersey area, and tell us your reaction to this and what folks need to really know today.
Well, first, I want to thank you, Jeff, and Greg, for releasing this information. This information is so important that the public come to know that these predators are still working, living among us. And again, as has been said, unknown, unbeknownst to most of us. And that's tragic, right? I'm not shocked by those numbers. As somebody who deals with many victims, it's not surprising to me. When 1 in 6 boys and 1 in 4 girls are the victim of unwanted sexual contact by the age of 18, we should no longer be shocked. We should be angry and move to action. But what this tells me, it proves that we need to give victims access to our judicial system, to our courts, long denied, because without this information would never be exposed. It is, such as this case, a court proceeding that has forced the disclosure of this information. And it should not be that way, but it is, and for many institutions. I myself, a survivor of clergy abuse, when I came forward and told church leadership when I was 19, the man was left in ministry for many years thereafter, was even promoted, served as Cardinal McCarrick's personal secretary. So it's the same for all institutions. They rally to protect itself and its own organization over the need to keep children safe from known predators. And that's a problem. I'm glad this information is being exposed here. It's so important that the residents here in New Jersey, this is about protecting children. And I'm really glad this is happening today. Unfortunately, tragically, that we have to do this, but it's important and necessary. Thank you.
And Greg, step up here, will you please? Because we were just in New York and doing the same kind of release of these revelations. And in New York, the law has changed and the
Right.
Child Victims Act has passed, and survivors will have a chance to have their voice and can come forward privately as Jane Does and John Does, but bring an action to expose their offenders, to expose the systems and or the institutions that made the choice to protect them and keep their privacy, right, Brady?
That's a big thing. Yeah, if I could speak to that
Yeah,
quickly.
speak to that, will
So
you?
people always talk about survivors coming forward and speaking out, and speaking out doesn't mean, and I'm speaking to anyone who's a survivor out there, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men, but speaking out doesn't mean speaking into a microphone. It's starting with just being honest with yourself and getting a journal and writing down what happened to you really happened and it wasn't your fault. And then it's finding people that have been in this fight and been in the trenches for a long time who are able to help any survivor go through this process without having to be public in this sense. And it's really important for me that people know, with the passage of the Child Victims Act in New York State and with the signing in New Jersey, that there are Jane and John Does that can come forward, and the amount of healing and the amount of empowerment that comes from someone just taking back their own narrative and finally getting some agency over their life will really help so many people in our communities.
So I hear you say that it's both empowering for a survivor to be able to have that voice acknowledged and heard, and then also gives a survivor a chance to protect other kids.
That's exactly what it's about. So again, a little about my story. I went back to speed skating after taking 7 years off. And there was a little girl at the rink, her name is Claire. And I just saw myself in her. And I thought everything is the same. The man that molested me is on banners that are hanging above the rink. This little girl is skating. She wants to be the best she can be. She's hanging out with me. I'm 30. She's 7. I was like, this is the same recipe. And I said that I'm going to come forward. I knew that there was nothing I could do in terms of legal action, and I was prepared to be sued for defamation of character. But however painful or hard or awkward it is to stand up as a survivor and speak like this, I would do it every day from now to the end if it protects one child, because the nightmares that so many of us have lived through, to be able to prevent that from the next child is the whole point. And so while we're naming individuals in these brochures of Boy Scouts of America, we're doing much more than that. We're pointing out the institutional failure that is taking place, that people had records and documents of foul actors among them and did nothing to report to the authorities or provide safety to the children. So yes, it is 100% about giving the voice back to the survivor. And when that survivor gets that voice, knowing that they're helping just a whole host of children that are yet to come through all these communities.
And the law is changing, and it's changing hopefully here in New Jersey. Greg,
Right.
tell us about that and what that means to this whole movement.
Well, Bridie correctly said that we are anticipating Governor Murphy signing the bill any day. The bill has gone through the Senate Judiciary. It has gone through the Assembly Judiciary, passed overwhelmingly, went through the Senate, and then it went through the Assembly. It is now on the governor's desk. We anticipate and we hope that that he's going to be signing it any day. These survivors of abuse in this state need this legislation. But I will tell you that the legislators have heard the call and they have voted overwhelmingly. Only one legislator in this state did not vote to pass this legislation. So we absolutely anticipate Governor Murphy signing this bill wholeheartedly and giving these victims in the state, in this great state where I was born and raised, the voice and the right to proceed with taking back their healing, taking back their voice, just like Bridie and Marc are doing. I mean, that's what it's all about. And I want to thank you for all, and thank you, Jeff. Yeah.
And Greg, the bill that you're talking about that's on the governor's desk, as we hear you talk about this, provides a 2-year
Right.
Window for survivors to come forward as a Jane Doe or a John Doe if they need to,
100%.
and bring in a legal civil action both against their offender and any institution that enabled that offense, correct?
Right. Jeff, in 1996, New Jersey eliminated their criminal statutes of limitations. Now, after all these years, New Jersey is on the precipice for eliminating their civil statutes of limitations. And Jeff, what it does is, and let me be very clear, the bill provides a 2-year window for anyone, adult or minor, who was sexually abused in this state. That's a 2-year window. If the individual who was abused as a minor happens to miss that window, that 2-year window, and the window would begin this December 1st, 2019, and it would go to November 30th, 2021. If after November 30th, 2021, that person should happen to fail or not be able to come forth, not find their voice yet, they still have until the age of 55 to bring their cause of action. Now, one thing that Marc is responsible for is, let's assume that person misses the 2-year window and is over age 55. That person can still bring a cause of action. It's within 7 years of their connecting their abuse with their damages with their abuse. And that is so important, because sometimes it certainly when these children are sexually abused, and Bridie and Marc, you can say better than I can, but that is a lifelong sentence. That is a loss of innocence. We all were children at one time. All of us in this room were children at one time. We had a right to our innocence. And for these men that Jeff brought out today, these men took it away. Who are they to take it away? They have a right. Bridie and Marc had a right to their innocence. And that's what this bill is all about. It's restoring their voice and giving them the power and control that they lost as children and as adults, for those who, and my clients, many of my clients, including individuals like Marc, feel like they are the originators of the Me Too movement. And this is what this is all about. The Me Too movement, victims of childhood sexual abuse by clergy, victims of childhood sexual abuse within public schools, private schools, Boy Scouts. It's about time New Jersey gives victims and survivors of abuse, adult and minor abuse, a voice. And that's what we're anticipating very soon Governor Murphy's going to sign. And that's what we certainly anticipate, and we appreciate the legislature stepping up. This is the best bill in the United States. This is New Jersey. As an attorney in New Jersey for over 30 years, I take pride in the fact that I am lucky enough to practice law in this state, because New Jersey has always been the leader among other states on so many issues, whether it be toxic tort, automobile liability, whatever. And now I'm proud to say that New Jersey is leading the way with victims and survivors of all sexual abuse. And that's what this bill's about. And we certainly anticipate Governor Murphy signing it very soon. Thank you.
And Greg, stay up here. So when signed into law, that gives survivors an opportunity to not only have their voice heard, acknowledged by the system, and an opportunity to protect other kids, right? Ready?
Right. Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
with that in mind, questions?
I'm going to say one thing
Yeah,
first.
go
Mark, we just touched on the Me Too movement, and I think that with everything we've seen going back probably from the Spotlight article that came out to Spotlight the movie and all these things, and then the Me Too movement finally allowed people to come forward and talk about their bad sexual experiences. And it started with horrific rape, right? And then it moved into primarily women being able to talk about sexual harassment and this gray area that was finally able to talk about. However, Me Too got one thing very, very wrong, and Twitter gave it a pink hashtag. We are talking about something that is not a female-only problem, and that's something that New York Loves Kids, we've really tried to push, which is hashtag Kids Too. Kids Too is not pink. Yeah, 1 in 4 girls stand up here, but 1 in 6 boys. And we see that with the Boy Scouts, with the Catholic Church, with all institutions. And so the idea that so many women were finally able to get their voice back with Me Too is amazing, but it missed half of our population. And so it is so important to remember that this is not, Kids Too is not just a pink issue. And the second part is that if there could be something that's worse than Me Too, it's Kids Too. And if there could be anything that society could come together around and support, it's eliminating child sexual abuse. And so one by one, as we change these laws and update it for being more helpful to the survivor, then we'll be able to do this. But I think that coming off of such a movement throughout society, that we really remember and the value of hashtag Kids Too.
So thank you to Bridie, to Mark, and really to the survivors who've had the courage to share their secret, to take some action, to organize and work on what they can, and to start what is now a child protection movement moving across this country, and now perhaps being signed into law very soon here in New Jersey. It gives new hope and new promise for child protection, the survivors. Thank you for your courage and standing with us today, with and on behalf of so many. With that in mind, questions?
Any of the scout leaders on this list, have they been charged?
The question is, the scout leaders on the list that we released, have they been charged? The answer is, we don't know yet, because one of the things we did when we realized the scope of this recently on January 30th, we started to go to work to say, we have to comb these files, knowing that New Jersey is opening up a window perhaps, and there's a real opportunity, but we have to get the data out there. So what we did is discern who the names of the offenders are and the locations of the offenses where they were put into the perversion files by the Boy Scouts. But what the Boy Scouts did with that, we know they kept it secret for years, and whether they reported it to the community. They didn't. And so right now, these names are not known to the community unless somebody in the community went and reviewed the perversion files the same way we did, which nobody's going to do. So the answer is, we don't know.
What's also important to know is that the list that was given out, that includes the troop leaders and the Boy Scouts. This isn't a list that Jeff Anderson made. This is a list that the Boy Scouts made. So they committed such egregious offenses that the Boy Scouts on their own thought they should put them on the list.
Yes.
So
I just want to add one point to that. It's really important to keep in mind that very few sexual predators wind up being criminally charged because of the statute of limitations, because victims are silent for so long. So they often have many victims, and very few of them wind up in our justice system. And that too needs to change. And I do know, because I'm here from New Jersey, as I looked at that list quickly, there's probably, I know at least one there that was charged or convicted, pled guilty. So I'm sure there's probably a small amount, but certainly, yes, very, very few. It's rare.
So the Boy Scouts of America say they believe their victims, they support their victims, and they pay for unlimited counseling. Your reaction to that?
Well, the Boy Scouts say that they believe the victims and that they pay for unlimited counseling is emblematic of the problem that they have at the top, and that is deep denial. They have to do more than pay for counseling and believe the victims. They have to identify the truth of their own involvement and the magnitude of the decisions and the choices they made. And that is identify every offender they know exists in their files that they removed, and then identify those offenders in those communities where they're living and working as electricians, as priests, as teachers, and other things. And then they have to be willing to be held accountable. And instead of lobbying against statute of limitations reform, they need to be accountable. And that means it begins with the truth, and then it starts with accountability. And until they're accountable, they're going to continue to do what they just did in the statement you just stated. That is, minimize, deny, and sometimes blame others. That's called minimization of the gravity of the problem they have created.
Can you talk a little bit about the fact that, in speaking with Mark and Greg, we've seen that there are priests on this list that have now taken advantage of potentially two failed institutions that have allowed them to gain access to these kids that they know, either won't report or it will go without any consequence for them. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Well, a lot of priests are scout leaders as well across the country and in Jersey. But Greg, you can speak to the clerical issue. You've been in that space for a long time working. Let's hear it.
A lot of priests attack the way the Cub Scouts and the Boy Scouts worked was they would often align themselves with a local church. It could be the Presbyterian church, it could be the local Catholic church, and that's why those priests those Catholic priests who were involved in the parishes where the Boy Scouts aligned themselves with, they were often leaders within those Boy Scout troops. And sadly, they took advantage of young boys, minors, and abused. And that's why I would no doubt believe that this list that Bridie had said that the Boy Scouts gave us is actually, when this bill comes out and when this bill is signed and when these men who were children at one time and abused by Boy Scout leaders come out, you will find that list is a fraction of the truth, a fraction. Because I can tell you that there are priests who were affiliated with the Boy Scouts who are not on that list and abused, not just in conjunction of their role as a priest, but as well as their role as a Boy Scout leader.
Of the 50 names that you are releasing today in New Jersey, do we know how many were priests or are priests?
We don't, well, we'd have to cross-check that. We would have to do a cross-checking, but
you
there
don't know
aren't.
right now.
No,
Parker, did you check that? We know there are at least 4 on this list that were priests. That we know so far in the checking that we've been able to do in the time that we've been doing that.
Do we know if any of the people listed are still leaders within the Boy Scouts?
We do not know that. Only the Boy Scouts right now know that. And
Jeff and Greg,
I don't hear them talking.
can you guys say, without obviously breaking any confidentiality, how young a ballpark, how young your youngest victim you're working with is?
We're not talking about that today, but what we are talking about the peril that we know exists. And so I want to conclude with 2 things. The first is, again, an expression of gratitude to the courageous survivors who stand with us and who have across this country and New Jersey and New York and elsewhere broken the silence. And second, to the lawmakers in New Jersey for having moved child protection and public policy to the governor's desk. It's a powerful time, an important time, and it's child protection legislation that's going to protect the kids and give survivors back the power and the voice that was stolen from them. So thank you too.
Excuse me, point of clarification, the law that is pending in New Jersey, that will allow survivors, victims to not only sue individuals in a civil suit, but also the Boy Scouts?
absolutely, yes.
The law allows individuals to sue the individual offender and identify the offender and sue the institution that was negligent in permitting it to occur and force the disclosure of secret files and dangerous practices and bring about institutional and systemic change and expose the offenders at the same time. That's power.
Are you representing any victims who plan to file civil suits? And could you also say a word about how you got these names, how you got the lists?
Well, we forced the list through litigation in other states. First in Portland, Oregon, the lists were first ordered by the court. And since that time, through a number of lawsuits, some of which we've been involved with, some of which a bunch of other lawyers have been involved with, the perversion files were disclosed. Same thing happened with the Roman Catholic Church. And those continue to be disclosed where there are statute limitations that don't prevent it from happening, such as the way it was in New Jersey.
Right.
So that journey continues, and that's how that happens. So
And the leaders on the list, they're from, how was that compiled? I mean, is this from complaints that were given to the Boy Scouts?
the Boy Scouts have kept a list of complaints that they got or investigations they did, and then they put them into the perversion files. They kept those perversion files or ineligible volunteer files, and whether they removed them from the Boy Scouts or not, we don't know. But what we do know is they kept those files secret for years, and then we forced them out, and they got forced out publicly through litigation in other states, beginning in Portland, Oregon. Last question over here.
Just to sum it up, what are you hoping will happen after you make this announcement? Are you hoping that victims come forward? What is the main purpose of the announcement? What does numbers mean?
The question is, what are we hoping that will happen? That kids are protected better. The kids are safer. And those survivors that have been hurt are given a voice and the power that was taken from them and an opportunity to have it heard and to hold those responsible for the harm that was done accountable so it doesn't continue. That's our hope, that's our prayer, that's our plan, and that's our purpose of assembling today. Thank you all.
Do you expect any criminal charges to come from the list that you received?
Every time we put stuff out, investigations begin that didn't start before, and it's always our hope to expose offenders and bring them to law enforcement, and things like that happen when survivors do things like this. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, guys.
Can I introduce you?